Welcome to In a Nutshell, the podcast dedicated to all things agricultural consulting. I'm Dylan Brush here with soil genius and ag consultant Bill Brush, and we're delighted to accompany you on this journey where we break down the different aspects of agricultural consulting. In each episode, we'll dive into the realm of agriculture through the eyes of Bill Brush, where consultants like Bill play a vital role in empowering farmers, agribusiness, and agricultural organizations. If you're passionate about agriculture, problem solving, and enjoy a little bit of detective work, this podcast is tailor-made for you.
Hi everyone. Today, topic I'd like to talk about, it's very in vogue in the news and in most farm magazines and in just a lot of different places, is what we call healthy soils. Well, it's hard to argue that I don't want healthy soils. I mean, obviously, you wouldn't say, I hope my soil is sick and ailing. No, you always are going to want healthy soils. And then we hear a lot, too, about regenerative ag, and its place in today's agriculture. So I'm going to start a little bit first with healthy soils. And what do they really mean, or what does a farmer take from it, or what does a consultant think from it when he says, I want to make my soil healthier? Once we explore what we're trying to do and make it healthier, we'll have to dive into what are those things that we can do? How do we build a healthy soil? And then when our soil is healthy, how do we maintain that health?
Now Bill's going to talk about why it's important to have a nice and healthy, balanced soil.
Well, first, the thing you need to do when you're trying to build a healthy soil is work on the soil structure. And when I say soil structure, it's that balance of cations, the calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sodium, and the other bases and the other things that are held on that clay colloid. Because if they're not balanced, you won't have the proper amount of airspace and pore space in your soil. It won't have the ability for it to receive water and have enough airspace for the microbiology to thrive in. Because really healthy soil is really all about the microbiology. The molds, yeast, fungi, bacteria, worms, both nematode types, that are also beneficial nematodes, and also regular worms that are miners of microbes and basically give you some more aeration in your soil. So all of those things, if we don't start with good soil structure, you're not going to have a place for all of that microbiology to thrive in. Dr. William Albrecht, who I've quoted many times on podcasts, said really our job as a soil scientist or as a consultant is to build a house for the biology to thrive in. Make it a place that accepts water and allows water to move through that soil profile to keep that balance of air and water in the soil so that microbiology will be able to live and thrive in it. And then they can then mineralize those components that you have in your soil from both off the soil colloid and also from all the other mineralization that you have in your soil, and it's able to get in and basically make those plants available. After that, to also maintain and keep these healthy biological microbes, we need to be able to make it receive irrigation, but then also hold on to water for a certain amount of time, but at the same point allow it to move through so that we keep air-water balance. These are what we call aerobic, microbes, bacteria, molds, fungi. They thrive in the presence of air. But they also need water, just like every other living thing needs water. And so we have to have that perfect air-water balance of equal amounts of air with equal amounts of water to be incorporated around the mineral and soil humus or organic fraction of our soil. With that, if we have the proper environment for microbes and we supply the proper nutrition, which we've talked about a lot of those, both macro and secondary, and some of the micronutrients so far. If they're all in place at the proper volumes, then we're going to get maximum biological activity, which means they will mineralize out a lot of those nutrients, not only for the plants, but also for themselves. And as Dr. Albrecht also said, anything that's been through an animal or plant or a microbe, basically the minerals that are excreted from them are much more bioavailable to the next organism that will consume them. So we need to keep our biology active. And with that, if we can do this on a regular basis, then we're able to then be able to start to talk about sustainability, which is how do we keep it in place so that we can always have that active microbiology. And sometimes, when we're farming, we don't have control of weather. Sometimes we don't have control of winds. We don't have control of any of the components of rainfall and all the other physical aspects of weather that impact us on a farming aspect. So we can have our soil in perfect condition to receive water, but there's a point where it becomes saturated and it begins to exceed the ability of it to infiltrate through and we begin to get standing water. Okay, we can't prevent those, but the closer we have to our soil structure being in place, the sooner that will move out, and the sooner it moves out, we'll be back to a place where microbes will thrive. Basically, most of them will become spores, and they basically will put themselves into an inanimate state where they are just waiting for the proper conditions of air and water to come back so that they can then basically begin to reproduce. So that's extremely important. I mean, a lot of people, when we look at what we talk about microbiology, we don't really actively go out, and microbiologists will go in and identify all of the ones. They'll identify feeders, they'll identify mineralizers, they'll identify things that will dissolve certain minerals that are in the soil quicker than others. They will cannibalize certain things. There's just all kinds of different species of all of them, the bacteria, the molds, the yeast, the fungi. Some of them can be aggressive and they can be detrimental if they are allowed the conditions that make them able to thrive in your soil. So what we're trying to do is get the aerobic bacteria, the aerobic molds, yeast, fungi, and the worms to be able to mineralize those fractions that we've worked on and fertilized for to get them in there.
Now Bill is going to get into talking about soil tilth.
One of the things that we also talk about when we talk about healthy soil, and a lot of people will use the terminology of soil tilth. And soil tilth is really back to soil structure, but it's a feel of the soil. If that soil has good tilth, it will have these good physical qualities that allow air and water to enter and leave pore spaces, but they will retain enough of each, the air and the water, to meet plant and microbial needs. And they begin to form, if not disturbed, micro and macro aggregates where they form their colonies, in the soils, and that makes them as a community much more robust in what they can mineralize and actually populate and go on. The literature will tell you that one colony-forming bacteria in the presence of the proper amount of air and water, that one colony will turn into 1 million in about a 24-hour period. So you can see they can repopulate quickly and they can go away quickly also with the improper conditions. Where we look at soil health, and now that we've got good microbiology, we've got that soil balanced, we have good structure, we've got good soil tilth, we're got in control as much as we can of our water, we get into what I like to call that soil health triangle, which means the proper soil structure leads to better root growth. The better root growth works on enhanced microbial development, and it just interplays back and forth. It's like a triangle that has 3 sides, but they all interact with each other, giving you the maximum amount of opportunity to be successful in having that healthy soil. The microbial mechanisms for improved plant health really are when they're healthy, just like you or me. If you're run down and not eating well and not sleeping well, you're more susceptible to some kind of pathological disease. It could just be a cold. It could be the flu. It could be any of the normal little day-to-day things we might pick up. Well, your plants and soils are no different. They will be more susceptible to pathogen pressures. They'll be more susceptible to not being efficient at what they do. So when we get improved soil health, guess what? We'll get a better production of what we call plant hormones. I won't get into detail in this one, but there are many hormones that they produce that enhance the plant growth, and they make nutrient cycling more efficient. They're able to cycle nutrients in through their bodies and then back out to the plants. And like I said, they become less susceptible to pathogen pressures. So if we make a healthier soil, follow that logic down, we make healthier plants. And if we make healthier plants, we make a better, healthier food source for the population that eats it, whether it's livestock or humans. It is better and healthier. So that's ultimately what we're striving for when we talk about making healthier soils.
Now Bill's going to move on to talking about organic matter.
One of the things that a lot of people think when you have a healthy soil, the first thing you want to do is build organic matter. I don't know, since I started in soils years and years ago, people always said, well, I'm going to build up my organic matter. I'm going to build up my organic matter. Well, how are you going to do that? Well, I'm going to put on a lot of compost, okay? That alone is not going to build organic matter. You have to have several things in place to be able to turn that, what I will call carbon material. A very good compost can be a good source to build over a period of time, can build, some true soil humus, which is what we're really trying to build. That organic matter that's stabilized and in your soil with all these aggregates that are formed, both the micro and macro aggregates that make that soil able to break down carbon material and over time stabilize that with nutrients into that carbon material to make a beautiful product, which is soil humus. And once we build soil humus, it's a storage unit in your soil that attracts and holds a lot of nutrients. And those nutrients are very, very bioavailable. And if you don't disturb them, they will be a constant source. They will release, but they'll also be reattached as things break down in the soil. So it's just like a circle. It's going around, and part of it's flipping off some of this nutrients, and they're picking them up, your plant, and then, or in some ways, of course, your microbes are also feasting on this. And then they are repopulating that same carbon molecule where that soil humus resides. So if you wanted to build organic matter, and I'll give you an idea how difficult it is. We always talk about the aerobic zone, which is 6 3/4 inches. And that's on your topsoil. And the numbers tell you it's going to weigh close to 2 million pounds. So if you're looking on your soil test, and to raise your organic matter 1/10 of 1%, you must add 20,000 pounds of 100% organic matter at zero moisture, and 100% of that organic matter or carbon material you put on got mineralized and put in and got turned into soil humus. It's a daunting task, and not one that most people have the length of time to wait for this to happen. You can see if I want to raise that 1 full percent, it's going to take me several years to get there. And that's under the best conditions. And once you have a condition that's not the best, you will basically burn up or utilize some of that soil humus, and you won't really be building it. You'll get the benefit of the utilization by the plants, but you will not see it in your soil test as building humus. So it takes many, many years and doing things consistently. I always talk to people when they say, well, I put compost on to raise my organic matter, and they do it about every 4 or 5 years. It's not going to work. You don't just put it on one time and think that's the end of it. It becomes a compost system or a program where you're adding to the soil. Every year you're putting some carbon material on there. And over time, then you begin to get that released out. You know, most times when you look at a good compost and you're using it to build your soil humus, the first year you'll only get, we'll just take some of the nutrients, you'll get about 50% of the available nutrient. So say you had 100 pounds of available nitrogen in the amount of compost I put out there. The first year, 50 pounds of that would be available to the plant. And they'd be available to the microbes also, and the microbes in turn would probably yield that back to the plants. So that means out of the 100, you would have used 50 of it. Now, there's 50 left. Out of that 50, the next year, you're going to get 50% of that. So you can get 25 pounds. And on down the line, the next year, you get 12 and a half. The next year, you get 6 and a quarter. The next year, you get 3 and an eighth. And eventually, you will utilize all of the 100 pounds of nitrogen out of that compost. So if you are just putting it on one time and every 3 or 4 years you put it, you never get the full effect of multiple years of compost applications. And when you begin to, particularly in light sandy soils, you already have a marginally minimal amount of clay particles to hold nutrients. So if you're just putting on compost 1 year, in those light sandy soils, and if you're in fairly hot conditions, which what we see in where I'm at in the Central Valley of California, we'll see some soil temperatures up 140 degrees or so, and we literally are burning up that carbon material every year on those sandy soils. We're not able to actually build up any. Now we do get a kick from them, and we do get some benefit from them, but over the long haul, what you're going to find is you really need to be on a program. The other thing, when you look at compost, look at it as actually a fertilizer source that you're applying to the soil. So we should be looking for a compost that fits some of the deficiencies in our soil. So if we have a soil that's deficient, we'll take in one of the major ones. We're short of phosphorus in these soils, and yet the compost we're adding has no phosphate. Conversely, I could have one that has way, way too much phosphorus. We find this a lot in dairies because we get a lot of manure applications and they're not utilizing the amount of phosphate that we're putting on, so we eventually build it up year in, year out, and now we have a problem of having too much phosphate. But if we keep putting on a compost, just because we want to put on compost every year, and it has lots of phosphate, we are just making that problem worse. So if we're short of potash, and so many times we are, because with compost, you can have some potash. Again, remember what I said, we don't get it all released just because you have 100 pounds of potassium in that compost that we apply. It doesn't mean you're going to get it all that year. You're only going to get about half of it. So you need to be putting it on annually to continue to release more and more all the time. Okay, so it's a daunting task that a lot of people just think, well, I'm going to throw some compost out there. It's going to answer my problem. You know, a lot of people have accused me many times of being, say, anti-organic or anti-regenerative ag or others. No, I never. I think they're all great programs and ways to improve soils. One of the things, they all come with limitations. I've never found anything in my consulting career that said, this is the only thing you need to do and all problems will be solved. Because there's so many components that you get into when you are trying to balance soils and you're trying to get everything in the proper proportions and the right amount, making sure that you are making that house for the biology to thrive in.
Now Bill's going to talk about some of the things you should take into consideration when farming.
So what do I mean by this when I'm talking about there's so many things we need to worry about? Well, first we just have, starting from the ground up, we start with the soil. What's in our soil and how do we find out? Well, of course, I've talked about soil testing. We want to find out what's there. That allows us to fit what composts are available to me and pick the right one. I worked for a client for several years where we would look at several different piles made with different feedstocks that made these composts, and we would sample them all, and then I would take that results that we would get from the compost sampling, and I would take it out and I'd say, this compost we want at this rate on this acreage. This other one I don't want there, but I do want it over here. So we would pick and choose exactly where every one of these compost piles went and at what rate we thought would be best for them. And we made some really good gains in not only production, but also soil health and soil tilth. And we saw several times where we got, really good results from matching a compost to the soil we were applying it to. So we started, like I say, with that soil science. And then there's just the science of chemistry. How do things work? Then we need to know a little about microbiology, because that's really what we're trying to feed in the soil. The mineralizers, the things doing the heavy lifting, the things that are really delivering the nutrients to our plants. And I've talked before about water and how important water is to growing crops. Not only knowing how much and when to apply it, not letting it get too dry, not letting it get too wet, but also what is in my water that's tying up maybe some of my minerals. It's tying up nitrogen, it's tying up calcium, it's tying up several things and not allowing the plant to get at it. So we need to know a lot about water. You need to know a lot about fertilizer, like I was talking about. Compost is not compost. It may not be correctly put together. So you need to know what you're applying when you apply compost as a fertilizer. You also need to know, if you're applying, say, micronutrients, which ones are going to be plant or bioavailable and which ones are not, because we can't afford to buy things that aren't going to be released in the soil over time. So you need to be a fertilizer expert. You also need to know agronomy. What's the plant trying to do and when is it trying to do it, and what nutrients are needed for certain phases of growth to understand and fit those together. And last, you need to understand plant pathology. If you see something that's attacking your plants, then we need to know how to rectify that if we have that. And that can be in any system. There are organic pesticides, there are biopesticides, there are commercial, mainstream ag pesticides. They're all there. It just means you have to recognize the pest. And if we've done a good job with all of these other things, we have a limited amount of things that want to attack our plants. Healthier plants always seem to manage stress much better, because it's no different than, as I talked earlier, a healthy person fights off things. They don't seem to catch every bug that comes into the area. They don't have colds. They don't get flu. They have all the ability to fend off all of those things. So there's other tools that we've seen come back into forefront. Many years ago, one of the classic things is what we used to call a green manure, or a cover crop that was planted, and then we tilled that back into the soil for mineralization. Remember, I talked about anything that's been through a plant or animal becomes much more bioavailable to the next species. So if we put on a cover crop, or we've put on what we call the green manure crop and tilled it back in, those microbes will go back in and break down, and all of that top growth is, for the most part, a lot of carbon material, which those microbes need that carbon material for their soil health, but they also need them for their physical structure to be able to reproduce and be beneficial not only to themselves but to the soil itself. Also, when you do your cover crops, is much the same as looking at a compost. What can my cover crop add to my soil program or my fertilizer program? A better way to put it is my fertility program is better than just fertilizer, but my fertility program. And what you can do by that, if you're planting legumes, for instance, into a cover crop, and they're great because they're nitrogen fixers. That's what legumes do. They basically take the nitrogen out of the atmosphere, and they store it in and develop nodules and store it there, and they become very, very bioavailable for the plants and microbes around them, and it's a really good source of nitrogen. But what if I don't need the nitrogen? What if I'm growing a crop that I don't like vigorous growth? Like we have a lot of wine grapes that always are looking to not apply much nitrogen because they're really trying to control the way they grow, control the number of bunches, control the leaf growth. They do not want wild growth. But if you're putting legumes into a cover crop situation in your your vineyard, you could be getting nitrogen that you're not counting into your overall nitrogen budget, and therefore all of a sudden we're getting growth and maybe not the character of wine that you want to produce. So the other thing when we're looking for cover crops, in addition to looking at legumes, which we can use, which is great for most crops, but not all, they also give us great root penetration. And one of the things that happens with good root penetrations is we also get good microbial followers. As that root starts to go down through the soil, the microbes will aggregate around those roots, and basically there's a symbiotic relationship between them and the roots, and then the roots with the plant. And so we're able to actually get those microbes to get into the spots in the soil that we'd really like to get them. And then there's also we want to make a diversity of our cover crop. So we want them to have more than just one species. We'd like something maybe from the grain family, a wheat or a barley, which is a real stiff, high carbon stem. Or we really want something heavy. We could use something like a daikon radish that really is a big root that really opens up soil. Or we want legumes, or we need something for those legumes to hang on. So you make this biodiversity, just like I talked about getting your compost to match your soil, getting your cover crop to match the needs of what you're trying to accomplish on the crop you're trying to grow. And then when you do this, the microbial population really will thrive on this cover crop. So the other thing I talked briefly in when I was talking about kind of the circle that all people must follow when you're doing all the sections of whether it's sustainable agriculture, biodiversity, is all those things I talked about, soil science and microbiology and water management and understanding water and chemistry and how it works, and soil chemistry and how it works, and also plant pathology, and also those things that attack our plants, those pathogens, both insect and fungal, etc., that can actually be detrimental to our overall thing. Once you've done all this, all of these things add up to be helpful, okay? And there's several things that we look at as we look with trying to make those. One of the things I want people to be careful of when you start a program, whether it be organic, regenerative ag, sustainable ag, always remember we're trying to build a microbiology that thrives below the surface of the ground. It's one reason it's been kind of ignored for a lot of years. It's not something we can see. So we tend not to worry about those things we can't see. We tend to look at the top, everything from the ground up, because we can see that. But below is really where the action's taking place. But remember this, as good as microbiology is for us, our plants, our plant health, our human health, all of the things that those microbiology is doing for us, the one thing they can't do is they can't manufacture. They can mineralize and pull loose nutrients in the soil, and they can then deliver those to our plants and plant roots. But if a nutrient is not there, period, it's not existing in that soil there, it's not ever going to be there. Our microbiology, remember, is not manufacturers. They are mineralizers. They are those that give us the soil tilth, the soil health. But they also need the same nutrients that your plant needs. You know, the same nutrients that we need for our physical health, the plant needs for its physical health. The same nutrients that those microbes need. So if we think we're going to solve everything with this compost, or we're going to solve it with regenerative ag, remember this: what I'm applying to that soil, if it's not showing up in my soil test, it's not going to be there. And we're going to have not as good a success as we could have had if we had supplied those nutrients in some form. Some people say, well, you just want to put more fertilizer on. No, what I want to do is make more nutrients there. It doesn't make any difference what form they're in. If I need a manganese and iron and it's in the compost I'm applying at high enough rates and knowing what volume I'm putting out, if I'm putting out enough pounds to get my numbers up, I don't need anything else. But if there isn't anything there and I'm short, I can easily add those with. A lot of people like, because they're trying to downplay the industry, they're trying to say, I don't want any chemical fertilizer. Well, a lot of these fertilizers are just mined. That's where they find them. They don't really manufacture them. They mine them, they refine them, and they put it in so that you have the proper analysis. But somewhere, whether it's through the testing of your compost, the testing of any manures you're putting out there, the testing of any of the fertilizers you might be applying, wherever you're getting them, regardless if they're organic or whatever, know what you're putting on, because it's a piece of everything you put on there. So when you come back and you start to farm and you're saying, I want to get more regenerative or whatever, do a lot of the things and consider a lot of things that I've talked about today. The one thing that's most important, there is no one thing, and be very skeptical if somebody comes in. I've heard this so many times. Well, this is really all you need to do. Hopefully you've listened today and understand there are so many things that we need to do to take care of and look at. Farming's not an easy business. And I think the information I try to impart through my podcast is to try to get you to understand, and maybe you don't get all the answers from me, but at least maybe lead you to read more, to look more, to search more, to test more. And I think if you'll do all of those things and begin to look at getting that soil structure where you need to get it, so that the biology, the microbiology, and everything that's in that soil can then do the purpose for which it was intended, and that's to produce good, healthy crops, nutritiously dense crops, and that's, I think, at the end of the day, bountiful crops that we can thrive on our farms and be able to continue to supply food and fiber to a very hungry world. That's all for today. I appreciate you tuning in, and until next time, I'll say goodbye.
Thank you for another fantastic episode of Agriculture in a Nutshell, Bill. I'm positive that everyone listening very much so enjoyed what you had to say today. Make sure to stay tuned for future episodes and leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And always remember to stay curious.